You're listening to Mondays Unfiltered, the podcast for anyone who's accepted that work is inevitably work. We're your hosts, Heather and Kristin. We break down burnout, baffling policies, and corporate chaos with dry humor and real solutions. Grab your coffee and whatever optimism survived the weekend, Mondays have begun. A little about us. Chris spent decades helping executives shape brands and craft messages that inspire, and I built systems that actually made those visions work behind the scenes and kept people from falling apart in the process. Thanks for joining us today.
The strength of the team is each individual member. The strength of each member is the team.
It makes me think of a football movie like Friday Night Lights or something.
That would be a good guess. Think of another team, a little more out there, out there,
Oh,
out there.
I have no idea.
Team of misfits, the Avengers, one of the
Oh, the
Avengers movies.
Avengers. Okay. I was thinking space when you were saying out there. The
Are
Avengers.
some
Okay,
of them
yeah.
from space?
No, they're just misfits.
But are some of them from space?
I don't know. I get so confused with them and DC Comics and all that. But I love
I
them.
know.
I love those movies. They're so exciting.
On top of that, they just help you definitely, um, completely forget about your day to day
Yeah.
life. But they
We just
definitely talk
watched
about
we
teamwork.
just we just watched what's the one with Wolverine and not Daredevil, Deadpool. And Deadpool wanted so desperately to be an Avenger.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It was that the Deadpool movie, or was that like another mashup of all the characters?
This one was Deadpool and Wolverine together. And I
Okay.
just the that guy is so funny to me. He's so obnoxious and hilarious.
Well, I think the interesting thing about those movies, like we were saying, is they're like a team of misfits.
Hmm.
And, oftentimes the way we've talked, we feel somewhat like we've been
Yeah.
misfits as well,
Yeah.
right? So, and I love the theme of this in terms of aligned teams and teamwork and clarity, etc. So I pulled a stat that I thought was pretty startling. If I
Okay.
can share that really quick.
All right.
So from a 2023 Inc. study, so not too long ago, they said a well-aligned leadership and teams tend to perform 2x on financial goals. And we've discovered that high-performing companies have an outsized focus on clarity, conviction, and alignment,
Mm.
something that requires leadership discipline, focus, and they go on to say not expensive implementations.
Mm.
I would say also, I think they talked about clarity. You have to communicate those
Yeah.
down the line.
Yeah.
And that's a favorite subject that you and I like to talk about.
Yeah, and I think the more specific part of it to me is not only telling what the goal is from a leadership to the staff, but to understand the why and the how it
Right.
impacts them. Because even though people are there because they know a skill and they're expecting a paycheck every 2 weeks, but people want to feel connected to the mission and they might not realize it, but if you take away things where they're not seen as it, like where they feel less than or not supported or acknowledged, people will start to diminish away. And so if you highlight how they impact, like I know I shared this story at one point. There was a partner that I was working with, and I said, what happens before the stuff that we do together, how does it work with the next people? Like, what's the flow of it? How do I fit in? And he was like, you don't need to know that. And I'm like, no, I do need to know that. It was important to me to know how I fit in, the cog in the wheel. Because then I could be more impactful if I knew, if it was coming from this way and I could follow up or I could support them in a way, or once I handed off, how I could be integral in making sure that it was the most effective for their use. So I feel like the people understanding how they fit into the bigger game plan is a really important factor that people don't realize.
Well, I think it also helps aside from en- clarity or engagement. I think that's what you're talking about.
Mhm,
Aside from, claiming a paycheck, and some people, hey, some people they want to show up to their jobs, do their
mhm,
jobs, get their
mhm,
paycheck and leave. But to your point, I think people feel much more satisfaction if they
yeah,
are engaged and they feel that they're part of a solution,
right.
part of a team. And that's why they're financially, companies that are well aligned and they communicate what the goals are do two times better than ones
Mhm,
that are not.
mhm,
And the other thing that we've kind of touched on this before, but I'm not sure if it's in this context, is that if you have a clarity of purpose and it's really clear all down the chain of command, number one, are you open to receiving feedback
yeah,
about things that could be improved upon? Because if somebody understands what the end goal is, the end in
right.
mind,
Yep.
then they can say, oh, if we did it this way, because let's face it,
Hmm.
I don't care if you are the smartest, most engaging, respectful leader ever. You can't know every single thing, and you have to understand and trust that your employees have your back. And so they're going to be on the lookout for whatever their area of expertise is or the responsibility. They might be able to discern something that may help either deliver more revenue, save you money,
Hmm.
look for new solutions. That's why clarity of purpose is so important.
Yeah. I agree. And it's important for the employees that are choosing to work in places that they're working that their values are aligned with who they're working with and for as well. I think you're more likely to engage and drive drive the message and be part of the the messaging of the organization if you have similar values and goals and it's something that you support and believe in. Um, One of the reasons I left the last role that I was in was because after realizing how and what we were doing as an organization, I didn't believe my value didn't match what I was supporting anymore. So I chose to go a different route. Um, when I was early in my career, it didn't really, I wasn't thinking in that way. I was more concerned with what my job was rather than who I was working for. But over time, I would realize these are not my people and I would move on.
Well, I mean, I think that, and you're talking about culture too. And
Yeah,
at
true.
that point, it isn't just whatever it is, the work product that you're producing, right? It could be a tangible product, could be thought leadership, could be something. Um, and we're going to talk in another episode about training. And I think you're right. I mean, when you're younger and you're in a new job, you're kind of excited about learning
Yeah.
skills. You're excited to learn. Do you like this industry? Do you not like this industry? And you can't be as discerning, and it's
I
also
have,
harder. It's also harder to tell,
yeah.
are you aligned or not
Right,
aligned?
right.
And
I
and,
have
and
heard more often, though, recently, young people who are interviewing for roles are picking specific companies to interview with based on their values and what they want to put their energy into supporting. But to get back to aligning teams and employees, the leadership needs to have a good understanding of how to communicate what needs to be done in support of the team supporting the company. And we've talked before about silos, how individual teams can have their own goals within the company. And so to be able to communicate that as well as a leader to get buy-in from your team is a difficult task too.
Well, I just finished it. I can't remember which Patrick Lencioni book. It had something to do with teams. I'm sorry. I can't remember the specific because I have a bunch of them on my shelf.
Is that guy
And
still alive?
yes, I think, yes, he is. He is.
Okay.
And in fact, I attended a really cool webinar last week about, so he developed a program called Working Genius.
Mm,
And it's kind of like Myers-Briggs, it's how do you work, how do you align it? It's all about aligning teams,
mm,
and again, it's with the understanding of, to me, I find that paradigm a little easier because it's not as complex as Myers-Briggs. So it is all about communication. But one of the things that he said in his book, back to what your point was, is you've got to over communicate what those
mm,
goals are. And he said, you can't just communicate, in an all hands. You can't just communicate by an email. And you can't trust that your managers are communicating. You've
right,
got to like get on them because let's face it, some managers are great communicators, some managers are not great communicators.
right.
So employees need to understand what those goals are so that they can, again, be engaged, come up with ideas, push back if necessary.
Hmm.
How many times has somebody wanted, I've worked so much in media and software, and somebody's like, oh, let's try to do XYZ. And this is the goal, and you're like, well, the system doesn't actually do that, the whatever technological system, or we can't actually do that. And so how many times have you ever worked at a company where you've been given goals, financial goals or whatever goals, and you're like, we can't even do this, and there's no way to communicate up? And I've seen situations where that has happened, and they're not meeting their goals at the end of the year, and the board is pissed off, and Wall Street, if it's a public company, is pissed off
Yeah,
because clarity has not come down and you haven't given a mechanism for clarity to come up.
yeah. I think two things came to mind when you were talking about that. One was communicating the goals and making sure that people buy in to to what they're doing and why. Um, because if you understand the reasoning and how you're supporting it, you can often achieve it. If you don't write it down, like if you don't spell it out, we've heard for years about SMART goals, be specific, be measurable. You know, if you can't identify those metrics of it, if you can't measure it, then if you can't monitor it, you can't measure it. I can't remember what the term is, but if you have something that you can see and you know the steps and how you're going to get there, or can identify steps and how to get there, you're more likely to accomplish it. Like there was a story I had heard recently where it was a sales team and they had set a goal for $1 million, say, and they had never achieved $1 million. But there was incentive, and the incentive was that if they achieved this task, the owner would take the sales team and the sales team to Bali. They hit the goal because they knew what was in it for them. That's not saying that they knew the company's mission, but they knew what their mission was in support of the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal was the $1 million. Well, the next year they raised it and they hit it. And they changed the requirement. Like, if you hit it, we'll take you and your family. And they hit it. And they kept increasing it to what previously was impossible, to something that they could see the finish line because they had a stake in it. And then the other thing that came to mind to me was one of the first things that we learn as children is the question why. And so I often ask why and how. And like, if you can tell me why, if you can explain it to a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old, then then you know it well enough for it to be understandable. But don't stop asking why. Like ultimately your why is to get a paycheck because that's what you're there for. But if you have more stake in it and you can understand like all the things that go to support it, you're more likely to win.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why that study came out and said, aligned teams are much more effective.
Hmm.
So I think, it starts with clarity of purpose. what is the goal, like at the top, communicating that clarity down, having a mechanism to communicate up,
Mhm.
if there's any challenges, changes. And I think do that before your goals are due to the board, you know, communicate down, communicate up. Because of where I've worked and I've seen so many situations where, they say it's a product led organization, and because I worked in software for, data software. Well, if the front line, which is the salespeople, which I often was, isn't being requested for those solutions, forcing things down the throat of customers that don't need things,
Right.
you've just wasted money. So, you really have to be, it's hard. This is what we're suggesting is not easy,
Correct.
you know, have a clarity of purpose, to have a communication network, that people could speak up and down the line with.
Mhm.
It has to be open communication, and you have to do it frequently, and you have to do it before something is due, right? So,
It can't be an emergency. We talked about that recently. Lack of preparation on
really,
your part is not cause for emergency on mine.
right, right. I mean, how many times have we ever been involved? We can talk a lot about being involved in companies that didn't have clarity of purpose, and maybe they latched onto something that might have seemed uh, trendy for the industry, or they think it's lofty, but they don't actually have the ability to get that thing done. And
Mhm.
had they talked to their employees,
Yeah.
they would have right sized that expectation.
Yeah.
Um, so it's not putting yourself in sort of an ivory tower, I guess.
Yeah. And something that when you mentioned earlier, the assessments, um, one of my favorite assessments throughout my career was taking the DISC training. And it allowed me to identify personality types. And something that I did for staff members that I had at one point was I had a ranking of things that were important to them. I had 10 things in the career. Tell me what the importance of this thing is in your career, whether it be money, whether it be time, whether it be flexibility, whatever it was that was important to them, then I knew how I could relay information that would that would engage them in supporting whatever it was. So things that were important to them, whether it was recognition or whatnot, and go ahead and rank them and figure out who your employees are, who they are as people, what's important to them to help you achieve the goals as well.
Right, right. I mean that's really important. And I think, gone are the days, maybe still they're still there, where the hierarchy pushes down and says you must do this, you want your paycheck, you want your bonus, you must do this. But I think it's clear from the stats that I just talked about and the study that I just referenced, that if you are aligned and you take the time to align and communicate, then you're much more effective. And so you can either use a whip or a carrot or information. I think I like information. I like conversation information better than certainly a whip. But um, I forgot what I was going to say. I got stuck on the image of a carrot.
What's up, Doc? I thinking back on my career, the roles that I have had, I think the ones that my favorite companies were the places where my input mattered.
Oh,
Where
absolutely.
people came to me and said, what are your thoughts on this? Or if I wanted to try something, they'd say, go ahead and let's see how it goes. Or you got opportunities to step out of your expected role and do special projects and things like that to find things that engaged you as a person in the organization beyond the job that you were doing.
I agree. And I think back to my best managers, and they were the ones that had they inevitably developed very loyal teams.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm thinking of them, their faces right now in our teams and how we interacted with each other. And there was a real clarity of purpose, even though we weren't sure exactly how we were supposed to be getting things done. There was a clarity of purpose, but there was also an openness for what you were just talked about is,
Yeah.
does anybody have any ideas? Does anybody want to think of anything else that they might be able to do? And it might be one of my favorite projects that we actually knocked it out of the park and made a heck of a lot more money than we thought we would. Was many years ago. It was a big media company, and I had asked. Well, I was working across siloed matrix teams, as I always am. Nobody exactly reported to me, and I needed to get something done, and I needed a software engineer to fix something in the product. And these people were not necessarily in the room when we had these conversations. And I was frustrated with because it was hierarchical. And so the directors were sitting there, they said, we don't need to have anybody else. And after the big meeting where we were discussing what we needed to do, I was like, okay, there's got to be a way to get this thing done. And I kind of asked around, and somebody said to me, oh, go down. And the software people were down in the lower level. We were all in the office at that point. So I got out of my chair and went downstairs, and I pulled this director's people, and I said, hey, can you guys think of an idea? Like, you guys helped build the original thing. Can you think of a way to do XYZ? And I wish these directors had had these guys in the room in the first place, because they came up with a solution.
Mm.
And had somebody not really gone downstairs and thought out of the box, like
Right.
let's get out of this room, let's get out of these
Right.
silos,
Right.
and let's go ask some people.
Yeah.
They ended up doing a phenomenal job. And I can't, I remember writing like glowing recommendations, and I don't remember if I was even asked like in the 360, because they didn't report to me.
Mm.
Um, but I kept thinking, God, if I hadn't done that, we wouldn't have gotten the solution. And
Yeah.
again, I'm not necessarily patting myself on the back. All I'm trying to do is point out it's so, so important
Hmm.
to not keep goals and things just for yourself,
Right. Right. Right.
to make yourself look good.
Yeah. You worked for a lot more large organizations than I did. I worked for two significant organizations in my career. The rest were more mom and pop and small business. So in the small businesses, I felt it was more difficult to understand beyond getting a sale and whatever the product was, and making sure the bills are being paid coming in, like more of the function of the business was pretty much always handled by the owner. And so a lot of stuff got stuck in that owner and executive level because it was small enough that there's, it's either the family business or, um, you know,
That can be
well,
tricky in and of itself,
yeah,
that it's a family
yeah.
business.
And they don't often share down what their intention is, what the goals are, what their expectation of you beyond the job that you're doing is. In the larger organizations is where I found a lot more flexibility and put potential for clarity, where people were attempting to build teams and build integration between teams and things like that. And they weren't always done well, but I do feel like in the larger organization, it was more like the norm. It was how you did business.
I don't know. I've worked for a lot of large organizations where communications, especially across silos,
Yeah.
and
Not to
sometimes
say that it was good, but I felt
yeah,
like I thought,
sometimes it was just a non-starter. If you had one exec that didn't like the other exec, you weren't getting across, you weren't getting support from whatever that was.
mm,
So you did kind of have to be at one point. When one of my boss called me Rita O'Reilly, because I would just kind of quietly go around and go get whatever I needed.
Hmm.
Um, but anyways, we're going ad nauseum into this. So
Yeah.
our whole point about this is aligned teams work better, whether you're working for a large organization or you're working for a mom and pop, which props to anybody who is, because I understand, some of the difficulty, because I have worked for smaller organizations too.
Hmm.
Um, and getting those leaders to share power, not share power. I guess it is share power, but just
Clarity.
communicate
And
clarity
I think like that's the biggest thing is what we're getting to on this whole conversation is communication and clarity and
and
engaging.
and collaboration,
Yeah, yeah. And
encouraging collaborations, the three
I think it
C's.
comes down to like knowing the people that are on your team more than what their role is, to know them, to how to engage them and how to get the best performance. And then you as an employee too is ask why, be curious.
The other thing I would say too is if you are in larger organizations and with silos or matrices, is you've got to be able to reach across
Hmm.
to your, you know, um, non-linear managers and colleagues. Um, that's where sometimes really the big communication comes down, and there's a lot of um, infighting and that kind of thing. That's what I saw. So it's all about putting the big E aside and
Hmm.
focusing on the three C's.
Yeah. And I think what I liked of all the things that we talked about today, I think the biggest thing that stood out to me from you was not saying something just once. That it's fine that you have a goal, but don't just say, this is our goal and that's the end of it and it all goes away. Like keep bringing it up, keep getting buy-in, keep posting it, have it be on your wall, have it be, on a screensaver or something to keep that engagement.
Yeah, and well, that's certainly what Patrick Lencioni said, and I'm sure lots of thought leaders about leadership talk about is make sure that you are clear in your communications and you're communicating it frequently, and don't hold all your marbles close to your vest because that will not get you your result. So, um, any closing thoughts on this, Heather?
I hope that the evolution of the office, even though there's some things that are reverting back, like going back to the office from being remote workers, I'm hoping something that we keep evolving on is the communication and the engagement of the employee. That like that's your value in your company is the people that are working for you that are helping you get across the line.
I 100% agree. And I think that's what Heather and I like one of our missions is to really talk about the importance of engagement and in an atmosphere, let's call it out. We're hearing about AI taking over jobs. We're hearing about, cost cutting. That's always been. I just read an article today that talked about or came across, I didn't read it in detail. The tech jobs were used to be the ones, where you're making your six figures and it was pretty safe, but no one feels safe anymore. And, the pendulum is certainly back on the side of the employers from some perspectives. But I think what we want to try to get through is even to employers to say, hey, I don't have to pay employees as much. I don't have to treat them as well. Not that they would come out and say things like that openly, but that you understand that you will actually do better. Your clients will be happier. You'll see, 2x the productivity, 2x the revenue if you embrace these policies.
Oh, and until next time.
Stay unfiltered. That's it for this episode of Mondays Unfiltered. If something today made you laugh, think, cringe, or finally question the workplace norms you've been conditioned to accept, good. That's where change begins. If you enjoyed the conversation, hit subscribe, share the episode with someone who deserves a better Monday, and help us push the movement towards healthier, more human workplaces. And we want to hear your stories. The surprises, the successes, the dysfunction, the burnout, the breakthroughs, just send them our way. Your experience might shape a future episode. And remember, we can do better, we can be better, and we don't have to tolerate BS just because it feels familiar. Until next week, stay curious, stay courageous, and stay unfiltered.